This birth story that I'm going to share with you is one of my own. This is my second daughter, Juliette. I shared with you Hannah's birth story in the first class. And this one came 2.5 years later when I got pregnant the second time. Now, with the second born, at that point I was a doula, so I knew a bit more about birth and I was more confident. When I was pregnant with Juliette, I actually had no symptoms whatsoever of being pregnant. I felt great the whole time. In fact, I went 11 days overdue with her, and even on those last days and weeks, I felt fine. I had energy. Other than having to get up and go pee 11 times a night, I was rocking it. And I think a lot of that was simply because I learned to have a positive internal environment and think positive thoughts about pregnancy and labor. These principles had become so second nature to me by this time that I just simply loved being pregnant. There were actually moments where I would walk through hallways or doors and I would accidentally hit my belly on like a chair because I literally would forget that I had this huge belly sticking out of me because I just didn't feel pregnant. And so I tell women all the time, you don't have to accept these pregnancy symptoms. You can feel great all the way until the end. So I release that testimony to you, claim it as your own. But it became a little bit more work when she went into labor. Now, I was getting pretty emotional. Now, I went 7 days late with Hannah, but with Juliette, I'm thinking, okay, she's my second baby. She'll probably come like 3 days late. And it'll be a faster labor and it'll be an easier labor. Yay, God. But that's not what happened. I had planned for a home birth again because I had such an amazing experience the first time around. Once you go home birth, you never go back. It's just true. And so I was pregnant and getting so emotional and counting the days. And at this point, I know that I am losing my grip a little bit. I'm going, okay, she should have been out by now, and I'm having to constantly readjust my expectations. I remember at one point getting chiropractic adjustments, getting acupuncture, getting all kinds of work, going for long walks. I was trying everything, and this baby wouldn't come. And I remember calling up my doula and just feeling so overwhelmed and emotional. And she told me the same thing that I tell my clients when they're overdue. You're not designed to be pregnant forever. This baby will come out. Give it time. I just needed to rest and relax and let go of that tension. I cried, I prayed, and I surrendered to the process of birth. The labor, when I did finally have contractions, it was 10 days overdue, and I felt them throughout the night. And then by morning, however, they had stretched out so far that they were like, I would have one contraction an hour. And yet it kept me up all night long laboring because they were 5 and 10 minutes apart. So not only did I lose sleep, but then they stopped. And so that emotion comes back again, and I'm like, I thought I was in labor. And of course, like, you're so ready to have this baby, and then it stops, and there's nothing you can do about it. That happens to a lot of women, actually. It's not as uncommon as you may think. And so my midwife was very smart. She said, I talked to her, later that evening when nothing still had happened throughout the day. She said, don't try to stir anything up, just go to bed and get a good night's sleep, and you'll feel a lot better in the morning, and maybe they'll come back. So I resolved in my heart, and I said, okay, that's a great idea. I have no intention of trying to get labor going right now. I'm gonna go to bed and sleep. And so I hang up with her. 10 minutes later, I get a contraction. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I just surrendered and accepted the fact that I was not in labor, and now labor starts again? I was planning to sleep, and so I'm like, I'm not having this. I'm gonna get a good night's sleep. So I charge into the bathroom, I draw a hot bath, I take a bath because I know a bath will slow labor down in early labor. And so I'm thinking, I'm gonna show this labor who's boss. I'm gonna take my bath and I'm gonna go to bed. But it didn't happen. The contractions kept coming. When I got out of the bath, they were still happening, but they were far apart. So we ended up going to bed because I still knew I needed the rest, and I had not slept much the night before. And then at a certain point, I think it was actually around 10 p.m., I realized I'm not gonna sleep. These contractions are coming. So I said, okay, change my expectations again. I'm in labor. this is really happening. I could tell they felt different. I could tell they had a consistent pattern, and they were stronger, more regular, and it felt like real labor. I was like, this feels like real labor, not the fake labor. So I resolved to accept that I was in labor, and I chose to get happy. And so Jonathan and I began to just laugh and joke. We started eating food and turned on music and started dancing around the kitchen. We laughed, we talked. I would dance and he would laugh at me and make fun of me for how silly I looked, and all that laughter alleviated pain. Remember, laughter opens your sphincters. So we just had a great time and we made it fun. The contractions were not painful, but I could feel a bit of back pressure, that back labor that you feel sometimes, but the contractions themselves did not hurt. The only problem was it was getting late and I was exhausted. I couldn't stand up all night. What I found is that as long as I was lifting up my belly and doing what's called the lift and tuck, that I didn't experience that back labor. And that back labor is often because the baby's in a posterior position, or it's coming down, hitting that tailbone. And so the nerves and the muscles around your lower back can feel lots and lots of pressure or pain. And I felt it in my lower back, but the contractions didn't hurt. And I found that this position or technique that's called the lift and tuck, and you can find out more about it on spinningbabies.com. And I'll actually do a little bonus video to show you what it looks like. But I would lean against a wall and lift my belly up really high, and it alleviated the back pressure. And so as long as I was doing that, I had no pain during the contractions. It was just that darn back labor, and I had to do this lift with my stomach. But it's getting late now, and I'm exhausted, and I realize I have to go to bed. I have to sleep. But I can't stand up all night doing the lift and tuck. And so I tried to lay down, but then the back labor would hurt too much. And so I'd have to get on my hands and knees, and Jonathan would have to squeeze my hips. But I realized I can't go through another night alone of contractions. I need help. So what he did, my husband is amazing. He grabbed a chair, wheeled it right up next to my bed. I laid down to sleep. He got his laptop out and he started binge watching seasons of The Office while I laid in bed and slept. And then when a contraction came, I'd get up on my hands and knees and he would squeeze my hips together. And then when it stopped, I'd go and fall back asleep, and I was sleeping 5, 7, 8, 10 minutes in between contractions. And he stayed up so he could squeeze my hips. That was the only way they didn't hurt, but it allowed me to get some rest. By about 2 a.m., my contractions were about 6 or 7 minutes apart, and I could no longer sleep in between them. So I just said, if I can't sleep, I might as well get out of bed. So we got out of bed, and as soon as I stood up, the next contractions became 3 minutes apart. And I'm like, well, that's a big shift. So all of a sudden, I'm like, 3 minutes apart. That means I'm in like active labor. That means I might be further along than I realize. And so I called my doulas and my midwives and friends, and they started coming over. I had invited a few more people to this birth because I thought it would be great for them to be a part of this experience because I love them and they supported me in it. And so one thing to note is that sometimes when the position you're in labor changes, the contraction pattern, that tends to indicate that the baby might not be in a great position in the pelvis. So just something to keep in mind. So my friends started arriving. I had 2 girlfriends, Crystal, who I'll interview in one of these segments, and Joy. She's a nurse practitioner. And then I had 2 doulas who came, and I had 2 midwives. And so I had a little bit of a full household, actually 3 midwives, and that's a separate story. But so they started to come, and I'm greeting them. It's like 3 in the morning, and I'm excited. But I notice my heart starts speeding a little bit, and I still have to like concentrate on these contractions, and I stand against the wall and I do the lift and tuck, but I'm doubting myself now, and I'm asking myself, did I invite too many people? Was that a mistake? Is this going to be a distraction for me? And so the doulas and my friends were so sensitive and they're aware, so they just let me retreat, and I would find a little space and I would focus and go inward and allow myself to find my grounding so that I could re-energize and get control and not experience any pain. And then the contraction would end, and I'd start talking to them and laughing with them again. And I felt like I was pulling on their energy, and there was like this just buzz and energy in the room. It actually felt like a party. This whole labor from start to finish felt like a party. It was so full of joy and excitement, and I'm an extrovert, so I love people, and it was like I got to have my favorite people in the world there with me for this labor. It was a celebration. So we were talking, and I would, as soon as a contraction would hit, I would dash back to the wall, and I made a little station for myself against the wall with 2 little knee pads, because the floor started to feel too hard on my feet. It was like I would feel the reverberation of the contractions in my body and in my pelvis, and it was too hard, so I had to stand on these cushioned pads. And so I would run to the wall when a contraction was coming, stand on the pads, bend my knees, lift my belly, tuck down into it, breathe through it, and then it would be over, and I'd run back to doing something fun with and talking to the other people that were there. So I was constantly moving in this labor. It was much more active, and it required much more physically from me than my first. I would use the birth ball, but I realized I had this intuitive knowledge of what I needed to do and what position I needed to go in. It was like Holy Spirit was showing me, either in my imagination or just a deep knowing that this is what I have to do right now. This is what I would just do it. And everyone around me just kind of followed my lead or hung out in the other room and talked and relaxed. We just hung out all night together. So I felt so in tune with my body, and I didn't look for approval or affirmation from anyone to suggest something or let me do it. I just instinctively did it. At one point, I had the impression that I wanted to go for a walk outside. I kind of needed a new environment, and so the great thing about home birth is you can do whatever you want. So I grabbed my friend Joy, and we went for a walk. It was probably 4 or 6 in the morning, and it had just rained. It was a fall, autumn day in October. And so there were lights in some of the houses, but it was mostly dark and quiet and rainy and wet. And so we're talking about the name of the baby, what we're going to name her. We didn't know if it was a boy or a girl. We couldn't find out in the ultrasound. The cord was in between her legs, and so they couldn't confirm what the gender was. And I was positive it was a boy the whole pregnancy, mainly because I didn't have any pregnancy symptoms or nausea, and I had nausea with Hannah. And so logically I thought it must be a boy, because boys tend to have less nausea. So I had that stuck in my head the whole time. Lo and behold, it was not a boy. And so we're talking about the possibility of what this baby could be, what to name her, and I'd get a contraction. All of a sudden I realized I don't have my wall. I don't have my station. So we kind of fumbled around, and Joy turned her back to me. She became my wall. I leaned against her and lifted my belly up. And then the next one, I leaned into her, and she embraced me. And I thought, this must look kind of silly. If anyone looks out of their window right now, they're going to wonder what's going on out there. But it was a joy. We had a wonderful time. We came back inside, and I remember my doula saying, you might want to just focus and go into labor land and allow this to happen. And I knew what they were doing. I'm a doula, and I was like, they're concerned that I'm being distracted, that I'm not allowing this process to happen. And then a contraction hit. I went back into my lift and tuck, and I just kind of smiled, because I knew that this, for whatever reason, was just what I needed. I needed that energy, I needed that life, I needed that social interaction, and it was feeding me. And I think I was actually more earlier along in my labor than I thought I was, but the labor felt physically more challenging than the previous one. And so my mind was not taking me into those altered states of consciousness and deep relaxation, because I wasn't quite there yet. I was still gathering energy. I was still building that fondness, and I was still progressing in early labor. So I spent a lot of time leaning on the birth ball, rotating my hips, dancing around the house on my tiptoes, leaning against walls. I just had lots and lots of movement, and I had to keep moving or else it wouldn't feel good. At one point, I had doulas massaging me, squeezing my hips. My friend Crystal put a braid in my hair. I felt like a goddess who was being lavished with love and gifts. It was beautiful. We were laughing so much and joking. It was such a beautiful time, and I knew that all of that laughter, all of that joy was releasing endorphins and oxytocin, and it was helping me dilate. At one point, I thought, I don't know, what should I do next? And so I had this impression again to go up and down the stairs. I thought, okay, so I went up and down the stairs and I did it sideways, and then I did it 2 stairs at a time, and then I did it sideways the other ways, because all that movement in the pelvis is really good to help that baby rotate and go down. And I didn't realize how important that was until my midwife checked me later, and she said that you're about 6 or 7 centimeters dilated, and your baby's asynclitic. What that means is her head was tilted. Instead of putting even pressure on the cervix, it was tipped into my hip, and so the presenting part of her head was like here, and it's not going to dilate effectively, and it's going to cause labor to go longer, and typically it's more painful this way too. Thank God it wasn't painful. As when I listened to my body and do what it needed to do, it kept going. But I knew, okay, that's why this is taking such a long time. Suddenly everything made sense. It was why I was so overdue, because her head wasn't putting pressure on that cervix to stimulate labor. It was why I had my back labor. It was why this thing was kind of irregular in the beginning. Everything started to making sense. And so we went back to the stairs, and I chugged up and down those stairs. I knew we got to get this going. We got to have this baby. This baby's got to come down and out. So I'm plowing those stairs, making it happen. We also did the sideline release. That's a great exercise on spinningbabies.com to balance the floor, the pelvic floor. And I could tell that my psoas muscle was so tight. And when we did this stretch, it really helped release it. Even throughout pregnancy, I struggled with hip pain and tightness in my pelvic region. And I did lots of prenatal yoga and spinning babies exercises. And it was most likely because she was asynclitic that whole time. And so I was working to constantly balance my pelvic floor and stretch my muscles, but it wasn't enough, and she never quite corrected herself until the very end in labor when I was pushing her out. And so we're going up and down those stairs again. At one point, I have a contraction on the top and the bottom of every stair, and there's someone there to hold me, and that I can lean on them when I have this contraction. And so Jonathan was at the top typically, and at one point he had to leave and go to the bathroom, so I'm coming up the stairs, a contraction comes, my friend Crystal comes in, and you'll see she's a petite little woman. She's not very big, and so I go to lean on her, and with my giant belly, I kind of like engulf her, and I say, "This isn't working, get out," and I push her aside, and my other friend Laura jumps in her place, and Laura's like my height. She's probably taller than me, you know, strong shoulders, and I just collapse onto her, and I just get her all wet, because I had been in the pool too, and oh my goodness, but she was strong enough for me. And we had a good laugh about that, because I will always remember this memory of me shoving Crystal out of the way in the middle of my contraction and Laura leaping into her place. And thankfully Crystal had a good attitude about it. She jumped around to my backside and started pressing my hips. So I needed that. It was like I required so much manual labor and support in this birth. It is amazing how many people a laboring woman can keep busy. At one point, I was on my hands and knees on the couch. Jonathan was holding my hands, my head, he was holding my hands, looking at my face. Crystal was squeezing my hips. Laura had a scarf wrapped around my belly, and she was giving me kind of like a massage and rotating it and helping my hips, and the pressure. And Joy was rubbing my back. I had a midwife applying acupressure on a point in my ankle. I had 5 people with their hands on me all at the same time. And I needed it because it was so grueling and so labor intensive, but it still wasn't painful. It was amazing. It was intense. It was hard work for sure, but it was joyful. It was filled with laughter, and it was just a beautiful time. It was intense, but it was pain-free. The contractions were getting really strong now. I felt like I had to push at one point, and I got in the tub, and then it didn't feel like I had to push anymore. It was like they were coming, and I would feel that like grunty bear down sensation, but they didn't have enough power. And I knew after a few contractions, something's not right. And so we got out, and that's when she checked me and found out that the baby was asynclitic. So sometimes that false pushing sensation can be due to the baby's presentation as well. Fetal positioning influences so much in labor. And so I chugged up and down the stairs some more. I thought, we got to get this baby out. I coached myself. I thought only positive thoughts because I knew I could not afford to otherwise. Any negative thought that entered my mind, I would quickly dismiss it because I would speak the opposite to myself. So I was deliberate in taking every thought captive. Now, after going up and down the stairs countless times, I remember just getting kind of tired still and going to rest on the couch thinking, what should I do now? And thinking, when is this baby going to come out? Like, this is hard work. By now, Hannah had come out. And I remember thinking, these contractions need to get stronger. They need to get even stronger for like this active labor and pushing to kick in. And as soon as I thought that, I had like this string of contractions that were back to back to back. It was as soon as one ended, the next one picked back up again. There were no breaks in between. Then that one ended, and the next one came. And then that one ended, and the next one came. I had 4 contractions back to back, and it almost took everything out of me, but they were still pain-free. I used the same principles of sinking in, of using that sweet spot, of relaxing my whole body, of letting go and surrendering, and it didn't hurt. And I opened my eyes after that, and I said, well, that was like a half-hour-long contraction, and we all laughed again. And then I thought, okay, does that mean, should I get back in the tub? Is this like time to like, that tub is my epidural, I'm gonna use it, it's gonna be so beautiful. And when I was just thinking about, should I get in a position or get in the tub, a monster contraction hit me. That one hurt. That one took everything out of me. It was so powerful. And immediately I thought, okay, that answers my question. Let's get in the tub. So no overthinking it. I did what I needed to do, and immediately my body started bearing down. These pushes were much stronger and much more intense than I remembered having with Hannah. A lot of it was due to her position. So I remember feeling like, I don't want to be doing this any longer than I have to, so I'm gonna actively push. And I knew she was already very low. And so my body was bearing down, and I would only push when my body felt that uncontrollable urge to push. And so my body is making these intense bearing down sensations, and I'm vocalizing and going, oh, and down, and I'm being very loud and very vocal. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm being so loud and primal. This is almost embarrassing because it was so intense, but I had to release the tension. I had to release any pain, any sensation that was there because it was so overpowering. And so I yelled, I grunted, and I just said that I have to get, this baby is coming out. And so I just embraced it. I sunk in, I let my body take over. I didn't resist it at all because I knew it had to happen. And the more relaxed I was, the easier it would be. And so I told myself, you're almost there, you can do this. There was no time to think, we just had to surrender to the sheer power of labor. I pushed about 6 or 7 times for a total of 19 minutes, and that's when she came out. At the very end, I could feel her head slipping out of my perineum, and I said pop, 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 pop with my mouth to slow down her emerging from my body and to prevent any tearing. And as she came out, I felt her, and I thought, I could feel the head. I was in the water, in the tub, and I thought, the hardest part is over. I did it. This wave of relief hits me. And then there's this period, I always have this long pause in between the head coming out and the next contraction to push out her body. And her head's underwater and she hasn't taken a breath yet, so there's no concern of her, drowning because she's still getting oxygen from the cord. But the midwife is getting nervous because she can't see in the water anymore. With the fluids and the bodily fluids, she can't see her head, and she's concerned that she might be stuck. She might have shoulder dystocia. And without being able to see, she's nervous. So she says, I can't see, you need to get out of the tub. And immediately my brain did not question her. I stood up, and mind you, the head is out of me. But I stand up, and I have someone on each limb literally just lift me out of the water. I felt like a gazelle that leaped out of the water. And later my husband was like, well, yeah, that's because we lifted you. Like, I had one person holding each limb. They lifted me out, and I got on my hands and knees so the midwife could properly see the baby. I was pushing, the next contraction came, but she didn't quite come out. and they said you have to get your leg up. You have to get into the runner's pose. The runner's pose will open up your pelvis to the widest possible opening to allow the baby to come out. It's a great position for birth. But for whatever reason, my brain said, don't do that, that's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt even more. So I didn't. So finally my doula said, I'm moving your leg. So she moved my leg for me. And Helene, one of the midwives, hooked her finger up under her armpit and basically hooked her and slid her out. And so she came out, she was healthy, nothing wrong with her. They weren't sure if they would have to resuscitate her or what was going on because of all these little red flag warning signs happening. But she was healthy and beautiful. They put her down, I sat back, and the first thing I thought wasn't like, oh my gosh, my baby. It was, thank God it's over. Because this labor was more intense even than my first. And even though it was still pain-free, and it filled with so much joy and laughter, physically it required more of me. But it was such a beautiful testimony. I looked down at my baby underneath me. I took a few minutes to like breathe it all in. And I slowly picked her up and held her to my chest. And I remember saying, because I had actually worn out my voice with all my vocalizing and all my noises, and my voice was raspy. And so we looked and we discovered it was a girl. And I said, it's a girl, with this raspy voice, and we're all crying and hugging. And it was this beautiful moment. I sat down, reclined on the couch. They got me some blankets and cushions, and I was holding her. She latched on all by herself and nursed for like 20 or 30 minutes. And I did need a stitch on the inside because I didn't have any tear in my perineum, but she cut me on the inside on the way down, probably the same cut that I got from my first birth. And those stitches hurt more than the labor itself. I remember going, ow, what are you doing? And they're like, you just had a baby. And I'm like, but this hurts more. This was like real pain. But labor is like a visceral pain. So it's a totally different sensation. And it was such a high. I remember feeling like this is the joy I wanted. It was such a beautiful experience of joy and love. And it convinced me in my journey of understanding pain-free birth. It convinced me that it doesn't matter what the environment is or what the situation is, even in a labor where the baby's not in a good position. And normally I could have made the excuse that, well, that labor was painful because Juliette was asynclitic and it was giving me back labor and pressure. And in those cases, maybe pain-free labor isn't possible. But this birth actually convinced me and gave me more confidence and strength to believe that pain-free birth was available to everyone. And even in a situation where the fetal position is not optimal and ideal, I was still able to achieve a pain-free labor. In fact, I didn't mention this, but Juliette's arm was pinned behind her back when she came out. That's why she didn't slide out as easily, and they thought she had shoulder dystocia, is because her arm was pinned behind her back, and that's very unusual. My midwife, who has delivered over 500 babies, said, I don't think I've ever seen that in my entire career. So it was very unique and odd, but it gave me strength and encouragement to continue to bring this message to everyone and encourage you that this is available for everyone, no matter what your situation, no matter where you're giving birth, and no matter what complications or hurdles you have to jump over, you can have a pain-free and joyful, euphoric birth. Bless you.